My fellow Amazonians, fellow citizens of our great nation, thank you for tuning in this afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. And I'm grateful to come out today to have this deep and reflective conversation with our people. First, let me salute the bravery of the Amazonian people from across the four corners of the world. Our citizens in exile who have been pushed out of their homeland and have been struggling in the past 7 years to make sure that our country is free. Our citizens on ground zero who are bearing the brunt of the punitive actions of Cameroon. Every Mondays, you have demonstrated your continuous commitment to our struggle for independence. We thank you very much and encourage you to keep up the good work and to stand firm, persevere more for an outcome that will be more rewarding than anything you have ever imagined in your lives. To our forces without whom our country would have been recolonized on a daily basis, you have shown that you're willing to man the post even when your comrades have fallen. Today, I give honor to our brave Commander of FACO who fell last night. God should guide your every path. To our prisoners of war, our prisoners of conscience, you are the symbol of why we fight. You've been locked up in small spaces for long years. You don't have a right to security of food, health, any other form of liberty, taken away from you by the brutal enemy. As I said the other day, you are now referred to in categories. You are either the Calabar 9, you are the Taraba 43, or you are the Naira 10, or you are kidnapped from a particular block or from a particular brigade. But I as I said, behind these categories, there are names. There are fathers, there are mothers, there are brothers and sisters, there are uncles, there are individuals whose stories will never be forgotten. The enemy will be held accountable for subjecting you to torture and for using information gathered through torture to keep you behind bars. I enjoin you to continue to stand firm in the face of all irritations. You are in jail because of Amazonia, and that every day you should remind yourself of why you're in captivity. And don't blink on that objective. For those of us who are out, we will continue to make sure that one day you are free. And as I promise, switch places with your current captors. My fellow citizens, I am out today for a particular conversation. The reason I'm out today is because at each turn of our struggle for freedom, there are new introductions. Those introductions, the concepts, directions, and ideas are injected to confuse you and to derail your focus, which is very critical for the outcome that we want. I am the custodian of the foundation of our resistance. And I have to ensure that at each turn in our journey, I am able to clarify certain complex issues so we can maintain our focus and our pace. Because the devil is not the opponent that you face on a daily basis. the devils are in the periphery, the distractions, the confusion, the chaos manufacturers to keep you focused on the wrong things. And they understand perfectly that you don't have the time to understand giant concepts, big ideas. I have said repeatedly, there is no shortcut to freedom. Being nice in a struggle for freedom is an invitation for you to be killed or captured. Our people must understand daily the price they will have to pay. You can't want to build a house simply because you passed by the market and the price of cement was cheap. You must have a plan, and then you must begin to gather your material. And even if it takes you 10 years and build that house, at least you have a plan. But if building a house is simply because the price of plank or cement is cheap this week, I can assure you that you will never begin even the foundation, because you'll be waiting for the time the iron rods are also going to be cheap. The struggle for independence is brutal. It's tumultuous, that journey. Opportunism has no place. In resistance struggle, there is no experiment, because it can cost the lives of thousands of people, as we have seen in our struggle. It requires clear leadership, clarity in terms of the vision, and a process mapping that is context driven. From day one, we said this would be a difficult journey. At each stage of our journey, we have come to you with clarity on where we are, what we have achieved, the setbacks we have had, how we plan to overcome the obstacles on our path, what lies ahead of us, and what is required for us to journey forward. What we will never do and accept are the introduction of shortcuts without clarity and making comparative analysis that are out of date. As the custodian of our liberation struggle, I'm here always to make sure you understand this journey perfectly, and so you walk with a clear mind, a clear focus, and know that the price we will have to pay will be high. Most of us might not be there, but Amazonia and Amazonians as a people are already there. At the beginning of our journey, we were clear about the method, self-defense, not because we did not espouse or embrace diplomacy. For close to 20 years, we have been engaged in diplomatic activities. We have been engaged in public mobilization, advocacy works, both at home and in exile, educating the international system, engage in targeted diplomacy with diplomats, drawing their attention to historical wrongs that were committed against our people. We've had meetings with diplomats in Berlin, in London, in other countries. On the ground, we are aware that our struggle for independence didn't simply emanate out of a violent proposition. We failed to protect our homeland because of the absence of an army. and the invaders simply took advantage of that absence to roll tanks across the border and set up outposts, and began gradually to dismantle our economic institutions, our political institutions, and putting in place a system that we did not understand, implanting colonial posts across the entire territory with DOs and SDOs. Naively at the beginning, we thought if we had our own system of education, we would be able to set our exams, the GCE, and we will be able to have the outcomes we want. We thought if we fought for a university, we will have the kind of education, be taught the kind of methods, the kind of history that open our eyes to the realities of our existence and give us knowledge in terms of opportunities around us. All of these stopgap measures did not turn out to be true. We then engaged in another very costly adventure in the process of democratization, believing strongly that a free and fair election will herald in a regime change, a new political leader and a new political party with an agenda, to grant us our heart's desires. We then realized suddenly we could not even elect the mayor, or if at one stage we did, the mayor had no powers because the colonial DO, had to approve the budget of the council. That is how deep the regime had entrenched itself in the psyche of our society. At one stage, we thought leaning on the custodian institutions of our tradition in terms of justice, conflict resolutions, in terms of the practices that make us who we are, will salvage the day. Little did we know all the chiefs and funds had been bought over, reclassified, fondoms and chiefdoms redesigned in the image of the colonial master. And then the whole territory had been flooded with so-called elites who became middlemen and middlewomen between the suffering masses and institutions of the state of the colonial regime. That is how entrenched Cameroon's occupation in Amazonia had become. And every shortcut we attempted to reform the state ended you in house arrest, like in the case of John Frundi, who won an election with no arms and no limbs, like some of my brothers and sisters back in the territory, in the graveyard like others, in exile like others, or in jail like thousands of others. You could not reform the system. The system reformed every belligerent, except when this generation stepped in. And as we started this phase of our struggle, we told the teachers as far back as 2014, 2015, that an attempt to reform the legal or the educational system is replaying the bad movies of pre-1993, before Buea University was created. It was an attempt to reform the educational system. But the trouble with our people is every generation thinks it is beginning to set a record that never existed. Everything begins with your generation. We never take advantage of history to be able to inform ourselves about where we are, what we have done, the mistakes we have made, and how we can learn from those mistakes. And this has been a fundamental problem in our struggle. The other fundamental problem has been our desire for shortcuts, political relevance, on the blood and suffering of a people. The struggle for freedom, for independence, is not a political campaign. It's not a holding babies, kissing babies, hugging mothers and fathers. It's not trying to placate prisoners, IDPs. You cannot, in the struggle for freedom, save people with food. What they require is freedom. And it is very important for us Ambazonians to remind ourselves of why we fight, and to remind ourselves of the kind of regime that we are dealing with. If we fail, if we fall asleep in the middle of this journey, you will wake up in Kondengi, or you will wake up in the grave. And so it is essential that we adopt practices that will lead us to a desired destination, and that we must consciously and unconsciously shun bad practices, attempts by individuals or groups of individuals to show both themselves, prescribe solutions or ideas simply for the relevance of the moment. It is costly, and it is going to set us back many years. My fellow Ambazonians, in the past 8 years, we were faced first by the teachers and lawyers attempting to demand for federalism. And we were clear from the beginning that you can't. The reason we put out the Bamenda Proclamation in 1995, after the late 1994, was because in 1993, during the All Anglophone Conference 1, we cataloged all the economic, social, and political grievances that we have, and we sent it to Yaoundé and asked the regime in Yaoundé to discuss with us based on those grievances, and to redraw the map of the country in such a way that the Ambazonian uniqueness and autonomy is guaranteed. Even before that, when Mr. Biya called for the large and grand debate post-1990, Professor Carson Anyangwe and others had discussed a federal constitution that would have been the basis of discussions during the so-called large or grand debate. But overnight, those debates were changed into fax and telephone conferences. And so we made it clear to the teachers and lawyers, history did not begin in 2016. There is history, and that history should inform this generation of the approach they must adopt, the strategies they must adopt, the understanding they must have in going forward. But as usual with our struggle, populism and relevance of the moment dictates conduct and strategies. And so what we did was simply to redefine our path and move separately to begin to build a force, because we knew then, as we know today, it is the absence of a force that made it possible for Ahidjo to roll tanks over and took over Buea without a fight. That if we had an army, if we had our own force, it would have been impossible for him to do that. But from the nature of the leadership at that time, the political naivety with which they conducted themselves, you could still believe that the Fonchas and the others would have, even with an army, simply given away the army, as we are seeing the enablers and regime apologists forcing today, trying to criminalize our forces, trying to turn the defenders of our freedom into some scapegoating in order to get them to surrender and take us back to pre-1961. My fellow people, we said to Mr. Ayub Tabe and others that doing the proclamations, or what is called the restoration, on the 22nd of September 2017 and on the 1st of October 2017, without clearly understanding what would be required to defend, was suicidal. We were providing this as advice based on our experience, because we know that in 1996, under the Southern Cameroon's Youth League, we wrote a Declaration of Independence. During that period, we set up a force of more than 4,000 men, knowing fully well, once we declare, we will have to defend. And I know that on the 24th of March 1997, when Dr. Akwanga was picked up, we attacked the regime in 3 states. We took over Oku, we took over Jakiri. And I walked into Bamenda with a death chair. We were controlling half of Bamenda. Attacked Bafut on the 27th of March 1997, and in an attempt to roll towards the border. So we were not making prescriptions that were not tested. We were providing ideas from within the context that had been tried, because our activities ran parallel to the activities of the force of argument espoused and prescribed by the Southern Cameroon National Council, which turned our struggle into a laughing stock in the face of the world. For our struggle to be taken seriously, we must come across as a people with a plan. And before overtly talking about a plan, that plan must have been subjected to internal discussions, debate, and scrutiny, match against other liberation struggles. So we are sure that the I's are dotted, the T's are cut, and that it can stand the test of public scrutiny in terms of its vision, in terms of its scalability, adaptability, and in terms of its efficacy. And that's what we did. No one in Ambazonia can doubt that self-defense as a general strategy, the tactics of economic sabotage, undermining the legitimacy of the system in our country by dismantling its political infrastructure, internationalization of our struggle to be able to move the struggle from a place where Mr. Biya had advantage to the international system where we have advantage. No one can argue that these have been successful tools that has moved the people from relative obscurity in the past 7 years to the international stage, where a foreign minister will make a declaration about talks between movement of the former British Southern Cameroons and Cameroon. This is what a strategy has been able to produce. This is what tenacity has been able to produce. This is what fearlessness has been able to produce. What works can never be shelved for purposes of convenience and political relevance in a struggle for freedom. Those who have called for federalism, I have described them as not only regime apologists, but enablers. Because it doesn't take the brain of an Einstein. It doesn't take any intellectualism to come to the understanding that if a regime cannot reform your educational system, if a regime cannot reform your legal system, cannot give your people fair trial, it cannot discuss about the form of the state. It cannot transfer you enough power for you to have control over your resources, over your political institutions, and prepare one day to be able to take them over. And all those who have been calling for federalism have been masquerade, lazy enough people to think political ideas in the struggle for the assertion of sovereignty must supersede hardball stance calculated based on history and law. My fellow people, I know some of you, when you listen to me, you think, oh, he likes war. He just wants us to fight. That's why I'm out here, because it is easy. It's easy when political opportunists and pundits come out and start talking about referendum, and I just stay behind and I say no. And you say, well, it's because I like war. It's like when we said diplomacy wasn't taking us anywhere, I was called warmonger, all sort of names. The people who have invaded our land, murdered our people, were treated as people that you can deal with from the diplomatic platform. And so I had to come out here to explain a couple of things. Now, there are realities in our struggle which we must accept. And I always said every voice matters. Every idea should be looked into critically. But 7 years into a war, you must study people's character to be able to understand why they take certain postures. Back in the days, some of the people shouting referendum today would have immediately called it a massive conspiracy. They would have said others are compromise. The reason they are shouting referendum today is because they are all gone. They are all gone. They have no hand again in the game. And they insist on creating a distraction that makes them relevant, that keeps them in the debate. Our struggle is far now beyond debate. We are at war, Ambazonians. I was up last night, 2:45, and I've not slept up till now, from one activity to the other. In the next 1 year, I'm not going to have any hair on my head. I would have almost looked like 80. This is war. War for the Ambazonian survival. War for our existence. And it's not some war against some reasonable actor on the other side who wishes you well, who thinks you have a right to exist. A brutal opponent that pulls out our forces from hospitals, shoots them right in front of that hospital and leave their dead bodies. That drops enough bombs and bullets and fire that burns Mami Api in the house, for whom baby matter meant nothing, who could butcher children in Gabo, gather their bodies, pull it through the mud in their own blood, lump them all up in a house and burnt it down, who have burned down thousands of our villages, who on a daily basis burn down your home, rape, torture, extort. This is an army on the rampage. It's not some reasonable actors that we are dealing with. that you would probably at certain time presume that the wisdom of your own argument will prick their conscience to be able to quantify the impact of this war on their own economy and take some reasonable stance. It's a regime that has believed in violence, in corruption, the barrel of the gun, because it has succeeded all the time until 2017, when we also put in place an army. And so in our struggle for freedom, we must be aware of our context. And it is very critical that we also do some reading, right? That we simply don't just talk out of frustration. As I asked the other day, shake day, shake day. It looks like shake day. It looks like shake day. How, after 6 years of combat, 2 attempts to negotiate an exit by the enemy, and some people will turn around and be floating the idea of a vote. What is the question of that vote? That has not been asked through scientific surveys. 1995 signature referendum, more than 94% independence. Late Tumis research, the same. What is the question you want to ask in that vote? That somebody invades your house, knocks you out, and you stand out watching through the window, and you're screaming to the occupier, organize a vote so that my children should determine whether, we own that house or whether we should have that house. Why are we so weak? Why aren't we prepared to all die so that our children should inherit freedom? Why are we so beggarly? What is wrong with us? We are very unsuccessful because we lack perseverance. We like shortcuts. "61 years, all attempts at shortcutting has not worked in our personal lives and in the lives of our community. Look back in our communities today. Just look back in the different communities in Ambazonia. We believed in some elites who came in from the third country, brought bags of rice. They set up so-called development places where you put your small money, they dump in 500,000, they call it Makuda or Mekuda, Mboskuda, all of this nonsense. Yet our hospitals are places where you go to carry disease, you go to die. Children don't have good education, let alone education. Our roads are death traps. And you still have the time to believe and even listen. You haven't made up your mind that this is our time to end once and for all the reign of Cameroon over our land. For at least our own dignity. That you want to stand somewhere and they ask you, where do you come from? You are proud of your country. That you are able to fly into your country and land at an airport that you take pride in, where you are not harassed, where it doesn't stink where the hospital is not a place where children are dying, mosquitoes arrive, diseases prevail. What is it that we lack as Ambazonians? For 1 second, depend on Cameroon. They can't fix their roads. They want to reconstruct yours. They don't have hospitals. You expect them to build one for you. They can't manage simple monies given to them for COVID. You expect them to provide Nivaquin for your children. They embezzled money for their own sports. You expect them to build sports academy for you. In Buea, you are 4 days without electricity, a few kilometers away from Yoke, where the mountain has thermal energy to generate electricity for you, where Diboncha alone can provide you the resources to keep your cities lit and your industries functioning. You want to depend on a cacophony called Cameroon. Are you handicapped? Why do we need to preach that buying guns against an enemy whose only solution has been guns is such a stretch? They tell you that they want referendum. Quick furniture. Asawana. I want to hear you say Asabuam. Asawana. They they believe that if they tell you enough lies, it is going to stick, because they propagate it with such boldness and loudness that it can be too bold, too loud to be false. They told you that Eritrea had referendum. That's how they got independence. That's where I want to start. Case study Eritrea. Their poster boy on referenda, pathway to independence. Eritreans were less than 1 million people. Ethiopia was about 80 million. Backed by Russia, even the United States, other Western countries, against Eritrea. They fought. Block by block, hilltop by hilltop. They made their own guns. They captured those of their enemies and redesigned to adapt them to their own terrain. They did not blink. They did not beg. They did not appeal. They simply fought because they knew the power of Ethiopia that has salvaged Western imperialism from the anarchy of Adolf Hitler, that stood with the West in ensuring the demise of the axis of evil. They knew the power of diplomacy of the Kingdom of Ethiopia internationally. So Eritrea was not naive to waste its time in the corridors of power at the international level. Eritrea knew if it had to survive, it will have to fight. And fought, they did. When they quote Eritrea as an example of a place that got independence through a referendum, you should know the truth. Eritrea got independence in 1991, what we call de facto independence. They had captured Asmara, their capital. Ethiopia was defeated 1991. The referendum in Eritrea took place 1993. And why? Why did Eritrea after defeating Ethiopia, Comrade Isaiah, who is current president, called on the United Nations to live up to its moral obligations to call for a referendum for Eritreans' independence. Why, after capturing Asmara, Eritrean leader called on the United Nations to organize a referendum? I have some data here which is very important. Let's take it systematically. This data might be old, but it speaks volume. Of the 56 referenda on independence since 1860, 50 have held after 1944, with 39 holding after 1990. So if Asmara had fallen, Eritrea had gained de facto, and listen carefully to the word de facto, independence. Why did it have to call on the United Nations to organize a referendum? From this data, 39 of the 50 referenda for independence that have held since 1860 took place after 1990. And the reason is this. Post-1990 was the era of democratization, respect for human rights, and international legality. There were international values, international norms that you needed to adhere to be seen as a member of the international system. All or most of the referenda post-1990 was not for independence, was for international legitimacy. There were three fundamental reasons that, and I will come into this. The occupying states asking for a referendum as a face-saving means to exit after it knows it has been defeated. They oppress, rarely call for a referendum under an autocratic dispensation. Exceptions are in democratic pluralism, where constitutionally there is a clause that allows for a referendum. Scotland, Quebec. Under autocracies, the oppressed rarely ask the oppressor to offer a referendum. The oppressor uses referenda as face-saving measures to escape military capitulation. Each time you hear the oppressed telling you, give us federation, give us referendum, look, pack fine, put them in the boot of the car and drive them right down to Victoria. It's like, I don't know how to put it. John Frundi wins an election, the enemy ferries tanks from Yaoundé, locks him up in Tarinkon, and he was on VOA, Radio France, calling himself legitimate president. Or you find the other guy there in Nigeria, Mr. Obi, claims to have won an election, and is insisting that the courts in Abuja would declare him winner, not Tinubu. This is the level of naivety that you have in political figures in the continent. Eritrea is the first country in the continent of Africa that gained its independence from another black nation. And it was not through a referendum. Outright victory in the battlefield. The referendum was not for independence, it was for international recognition, political legitimacy, and very importantly, the international system loves precedent setting, that you use a democratic process to achieve an objective that reminds you of the method of ascension, and it becomes a normative foundation of your existence. Let me break it down. It means if you go through an election to achieve something, that election reminds you of the legitimate method through which you can achieve power. So let's factor in Amazonia. You ask people to buy guns. They can't buy guns. We were on the verge of capturing Buea when General Ivo was alive. I had sent expeditionary mission into Buea, first to capture Ekema, and then plan on how to march into Buea. We had organized forces from Kumba through Moyoka, Ekona, Munya, all those places to march down and take Buea. They came with discrimination, county by county. Oh, nonsense here, this day. We lost control. One of them calling for referendum cannot determine the strength of the forces in Lebialem. Yaoundé listens to that and says, what a weak people, what a beggarly people, people without a spine, without backbone. At a time when our core forces are garnering momentum, when the Bamenda Brigade is striking them, when the Mountain Lions dispatch forces across the Mongo and struck them, when the forces in Bui, the ADF and the Bui warriors are striking the regime, the forces in Boyo are taking action. When we are preparing our first elections in Momo, instead, and when we are institutionalizing different processes in terms of education, public health. Yesterday, I told the ADF commanders in Bui, I need you to set up a Bui Central Command made up of all the top commanders of all the brigades of the Amazonian Defense Forces. Every brigade must have the financial secretary and the treasurer. And I need them to set up the treasury department of each state, made up of all the finance secretaries of all the barracks. Any funds mobilized by each brigade must be reported to the treasury department, made up of all the financial secretaries, reported then to the central command of that state, then reported to the war council, so that there is not only transparency, there is the possibility for us to have an idea of the budget to be able to make decisions. And that any funds mobilized within states, 75% will go to invest in defense, a certain percentage in education, our public health infrastructures, and other community development projects, working hand in hand with our civilian population. The institutionalization of our liberation process is what everyone should be focused in, building our strength after we have trashed the enemy during the pre-talks in Canada, getting what we've never gotten in the history of our existence, commitment to negotiate based on the root cause between La République du Cameroun, movements from the former British Trust Territory of Southern Cameroon. Isn't that time to come back, reinforce the guardrails, institutionalize the processes, and prepare to face the enemy block by block and state by state? You come after having achieved this victory, you go back, you start begging the enemy, oh, give us the right to vote to determine what? And you want to use Eritrea as your scapegoat. They also talk about South Sudan, or South Sudan gaining independence through a referendum. Absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. You have to first ask yourself, do you understand the conflict between South Sudan and North Sudan? Do you understand what they were fighting for? The Sudanese conflict has always been a civil war, what they call an ethno-religious war. The North is Muslim, the South is traditionalist Christian, and the North has insisted on imposing Sharia rule across. The first Sudanese civil war ended in 1972 with a degree of autonomy given to South Sudan. They were not fighting for independence. Then Sudan again got up one morning and tried to impose Sharia law. Then began again the second civil war that ended with, and this is important. So if you want to cite South Sudan as an example, you must know where they were before talking about where you are. The call for a referendum, the referendum was part of what they call the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. The North and the South Sudanese, represented by you had the North, I think the GSS, and then you had the South, the SPLM. They engage in negotiations. And think carefully. You had United Nations peacekeeping forces already there. And who were those that were facilitating this negotiation in achieving the Comprehensive Peace Agreement? The United States of America, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Norway, with assistance from the good offices of the United Nations. And this is what I have reminded Ambazonians. Even, and I have always avoided to talk about things that we are not supposed to talk about. Responsible leadership knows when to shut up. I've always avoided to talk about the Canada stuff because it's an ongoing process. And we should not be scoring political points talking about something like that. Because statecraft sometimes requires its own set of rules. That by the things you say tends to create internal rivalry within the state that you want to negotiate with, and makes it difficult, if they feel humiliated, not to talk. And so we have to manage things carefully. I have always doubted if La République is ready for talks. I have examined key indicators, or looking at when other states decided to go into talks historically. And I married that with key war, economic, and political indicators to be able to make a determination if La République should come to the table. I have found it difficult to reach that conclusion that they are at a state that negotiation should be a face-saving political exit to capitulation. Yes, we have dynamic control. We are harming their key economic indicators. We have made them an international pariah. We are fighting them. But are we strong enough to sustain their gradual descent into anarchy? I don't think so. So why will Cameroon decide to come to the table to have conversation? We have also tried to factor in internal dynamics. Sometimes you find in regimes that are divided between the radicals and the moderates, they begin to fight for international legitimacy. One party would say, we are willing to engage for the purpose of being seen or accepted or recognized by the international community as a center of stability, of reason, and of continuity. So we analyze that in trying to understand what will pull this Turk state to the table. We did not reach conclusions on historical indicators, neither did we reach any conclusion on internal dynamics factors. But we said to ourselves, we are strong on the ground. We have been able to internationalize our struggle. We have achieved some level of recognition through targeted diplomacy, and we are good in the stuff. History is on our side, law is on our side. And we've learned a lot from the Swiss intention in the past 3 years. So we can take our chance. So when you factor in Sudan, you must ask yourself, where were they before the referendum? They had fought 2 bloody wars. First civil, the second civil war. South Sudan almost was controlling itself, using its very rich country. It had bloodied Sudan. And the idea of a referendum came about through the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. They call it the Comprehensive because it included other issues. There were, I think, 6 issues that were included in the Sudanese, the Comprehensive Agreement. And the issue of the referendum was one of them. Power sharing, resource management, other areas. And so when you engage a party with that level of strength, Sudan had come to the conclusion, or North Sudan had come to the conclusion, that with the strength of South Sudan, the only way for it to save face was to acquiesce to the idea of a referendum as a face-saving exit. In our case, we are dealing with a system that is incapable of even accepting that it made a commitment to talk. We are dealing with a system that is still trying to transfer the management of schools and hospitals, because they have heard that we've created community schools, to its so-called regional councils. We are dealing with a system that still insists on its right to occupy Ambazonia. So we are no South Sudan. And the oppressed don't call for referendums. The oppressed don't beg for it. They fight. They also cited, some people have talked about East Timor. They don't understand the context of East Timor. East Timor was a Portuguese colony. And Portugal had held it at the same time. He held Mozambique, he held Angola and other places. And a coup d'etat occurred in Portugal, and Portugal was struggling to survive, and he relinquished power in Angola. That led to the war between the Eduardo dos Santos and Jonas Savimbi. And it let go East Timor. And the two major parties in East Timor, one of which was the Frelimo party, they set up a government. And the pro-independence party immediately declared unilateral independence. That led to Indonesia invading East Timor through West Timor. And then President Suharto then integrated East Timor, I think the 17th state of Indonesia. East Timor kept fighting. The resistance was even crushed when the East Timorese leader was captured when he went for a gun run. He was captured. The remnants of his forces moved up to mountains. They were gassed. They kept fighting. And the international system, including Australia and other places, acquiesced to the integration of East Timor as a province in Indonesia because of the Muslim background and the size of Indonesia. One day they had their luck. Because of the crises in financial crises and other issues in the world, Suharto was pushed out, and a new president came into Indonesia and immediately transferred the East Timorese rebel leader from prison into house arrest and suggested the idea that he was open for an autonomy, but that if the people will go for full independence, they will go for it. It was said by Indonesia, it was not begged for by East Timor. And the United Nations helped set up the referendum and got their independence. They talked about Kosovo. I was in Germany when the UÇK, the Kosovo Liberation Army, was fighting. Kosovans were living from all over the world, the United States going in there. NATO was there. Serbia had no choice. Kosovo, backed by the United States, the NATO alliance, and all others, had to accept a referendum as a face-saving exit from Kosovo, which was always seen as an Albanian enclave that had its autonomy. And the president of Yugoslavia then, I think Marshal Tito, I've forgotten the name, abolished the autonomy of Kosovo and integrated it as part of the Yugoslavian bloc. It was not the Kosovars who were begging for a referendum. The Belgian army defended their land, fought like valiant soldiers, and allowed the enemy, through their international support, to see a referendum as a face-saving measure. My fellow people, so don't allow yourself to be lied to. They even cited Norway. Well, Norway was under Denmark, but a democratic state with its own parliament. And the Danish king made a mistake of refusing to appoint a prime minister from the majority party. And the prime minister declared the Norwegian independence, I think far back as 1902, 17th of May. Which country do you want to cite to fit the prism of Ambazonia? We are at the institutionalization phase of our liberation struggle. We have to build a stronger army, mobilize the resources our land has given us, equip that army, defend the land, and push the enemy out. What we must not do is to continue to attempt to experiment with this struggle. Take note, the Ambazonian Governing Council under my leadership holds the final word on any process, internally or externally. We hold that power with utmost humility to consult, to discuss, but we will exercise that power against any plan, internal or external, that undermines the Ambazonian struggle and threatens the aspirations of the Ambazonian people. I urge and appeal to our people that I understand it's a tough road ahead, but you have to persevere. We cannot give up. We cannot even contemplate anything else. Cameroon is not a state that we should even have as a neighbor. We should not have these people as our neighbor. We should build a big wall, very big wall, between Ambazonia and Cameroon. When they look through small holes, they see a flourishing state with highways connecting cities, technology institutes producing the next engineers, academics doing research on relevant topics or issues that affect our people, historians capturing key moments of our history, putting them down with all objectivity and honesty. So by knowing our past, we will understand our present and then know our way forward. When they look through that hole, they will see a people with free healthcare. I mean free healthcare after independence. Every Ambazonian, you are sick, you go to the doctor, you consult, go and pick up medication for free. You don't have a job, you have unemployment allowance, because that will be reinvested for the government to pick up value-added tax and income tax. No joke. The human ingenuity of Ambazonians will transform that land into a paradise. The natural resources endowed by nature and our God to us will be used like what the Norwegians call their reserve. You want to contemplate asking butchers who've never organized one simple election. They have invaded cities where they have changed the demographics. They've repopulated Victoria. It's almost like a small city in Douala. Part of Bamenda has been taken over by them. You want to vote. The one you voted in 1961, what happened to it? The one that voted in April 1961, what happened to it? You like shortcuts. The struggle for freedom has no shortcuts. Wield your rifle, defend your land and your freedom. Doesn't make you a warmonger, makes you a reasonable person in the face of your utmost reality that you face. That's how George Washington thought. Winston Churchill did not think like Chamberlain that you could compromise the sovereignty of Poland to appease Hitler. He declared British readiness to fight in the air, in the high sea, on land. In the face of our reality, how we communicate will tell the enemy whether we are ready to shoulder on or we are ready to capitulate. But as you know, as long as I live, we will buy enough guns that will make sure that Ambazonia is never threatened by anybody again. Where we were transferred from the Germans to the British, back to the British, to the French, then to Cameroon. Never again. My fellow people, 20th May is banned in Ambazonia. Stay home, stay safe. Report every activity of the enemy to our valiant forces. And I ask our forces to be the primary protectors of our civilian population. I know it's difficult fighting under the circumstances you fight. But one of the reasons why we fight is because we were angry that our civilian population was treated very badly. There will be general taxation of every Amazonian. We are working on the text. As I said, we'll have consultations, but by the end of this month, we will make that announcement. We will be able to generate enough resources to defeat Cameroon completely in 1 year, and before then, set up our hospitals, our schools, and we have a big announcement on education coming up soon. God bless you all. God bless our people. God bless Ambazonia, and God bless our valiant fighters. Thank you very much. I told you before, when the time comes, they will come to us. And I remind you, I know my national security advisor always reminds me I shouldn't utter certain words, but I say them so you don't forget. Because I know they are trying to take me down. But even if I'm not around, don't forget. You don't owe them child support. Don't forget the crimes they've committed against us. We, this generation, will defeat Cameroon in battle. They said they could fight. They said they had trained bees. They had United States provided tanks and warplanes. We want them to fight.
We invite them to fight. We invite them to fight. Where them they? Where them they? Watana wata. Ambazonians, don't be fooled. They fooled us before, not this generation. This is the never again generation that has decided to write the last chapter of its own history, to pen down the story of General Ivo, the bravery of our patriots who fought in trenches with Dengons. The stakes are high. Negotiations is not to give you freedom. It's to maintain the status quo. To maintain stability for international exploitation and conspiracy against our own humanity. They aren't coming to talk for the liberation of our detainees, our prisoners of war. They come like Trojan horses with bayonets to murder our patriots volunteers. My fellow people, the kind of country we want to leave to the next generation is one where people find peace and happiness and hope. Where people can laugh, even in poverty. They can transform their own society to reflect the kind of society they want to build. We want to build a country where he can walk in and feel at home. Where she can walk in and feel at home. We want to build a country where if you are a hairdresser, you take pride in creating beauty. If you are a farmer, you are happy producing cassava, being able to turn it into gari and find the market 6,000 kilometers away. We want to build a country where we can have a curriculum of education that empowers our people to capture the creative energy of sunlight and power every home. We want to make sure you can capture the rain of the rainy season and make sure you can still eat fresh fruit in the dry season. We want to build a country where you can find peace, you can unite your body and your soul and have hope even in poverty. We want to build a country for all of you. So when your final days shall come and you bequeath to the next generation something better than was given to you. That's why you've taken time off to come to this hall today. You're the finest, you are the bravest, you are the warriors of our war of independence. Don't let anyone fool you. I stand between you and your colonizers. And I'll make sure you're going to have your freedom. Freedom is a universal currency. It's valid through time and space. And as a human being, you should take pride in it. I thank you for your sacrifices, for your dedication. I thank you for the investment you've made in the last years, for having hope in this leadership. You are the grassroots. You must have taken note, as he said, you are the vanguard of our revolution. If you look through this hall, we have Ambazonians, professors and doctors in South Africa. You will find very few of them around. You will decide who will govern you. All those in exile must think like entrepreneurs, opportunity creators, for those battling in the bushes, for those fighting on a daily basis. I ask all of you to recommit. In the next few months, we can write Cameroon's obituary in our homeland. Thank you, fellow Ambazonians. Thank you, South Africans, for coming here tonight. God bless you all, and God protect Ambazonia.
The CIC
Welcome to ACN.